Howdy. Sorry this video took a while. I was dealing with a lot, and the small situation with my last video kind of discouraged me a little, I won't lie. But I'm back to get this video out before the update hits at least, so that's something, I guess. In this video, I'm going to go over every relevant unit's DPS stats with their best traits. This isn't a tier list or anything, just to show some numbers in hopes of letting y'all know you made the right choice in your choice on who to bring with you through the data wipe, or even change your mind on who you're bringing. Generally, I'll just speak about what I think is the best trait for each unit, while showing the stats of other traits on screen while I speak about the trait and why I think it's the best. With that being said, I'll get on with the video. Amy. Speed of sound gives her a DPS of 68 at max, and a DPS of 340 with max placements. While, yes, the range hit does suck, Amy is used as a starter. Speed of sound gives the same DPS as chaos control for most units, making it generally better. All of this without the increased price makes speed of sound optimal for most units in my opinion. And if you're that worried about the range hit, then just bring a cream and cheese. Classic Tails. Speed of sound gives him a DPS of 50 at max, and a DPS of 150 with max placement. Classic Tails already has high range, so honestly the range hit doesn't do much to him. That and him being the best slower in the game sort of encourages you to give him the lowest possible cooldown. Tails. Speed of sound gives him a DPS of 80 at max and a DPS of 480 with max placement. Like Classic Tails, his range makes the range hit from speed of sound not that bad. Tails' DPS did surprise me honestly, but he is still single target. I will be moving him up on the next tier list if there's no changes made to him next update. 480 DPS on an epic unit is kind of insane, even if he is single target. I'm pretty sure that's the third highest consistent DPS in the game. Knuckles. Speed of sound gives him a DPS of 80 at max and a DPS of 320 with max placement. The lower cooldown not only makes his DPS skyrocket, but it also allows him to get more stuns off. He's still not great though. Would not recommend bringing him with you through the data reset unless you're super new. Snow Brawler Knuckles. Telekinesis gives him a DPS of 37.3 at max, and a DPS of 112 with max placement. Snow Brawler isn't really meant to be used for damage, he's more of a support. If you want something similar to Snow Brawler but for damage, then just use Knuckles. Engineer Tails. Speed of sound gives him a DPS of 56.6 at max, and a DPS of 113.3 at max placement. The max DPS of just one of his groups of turrets is 149.3. and the max number of turrets DPS is 298.6. The DPS of Tails and his turrets adds up to 411.9. His turrets technically give him more range, sort of negating the range debuff from Speed of Sound. Just want to point out that normal Tails has a higher DPS than this starter that takes forever to get set up. Rouge the Witch. Master Plan gives her a DPS of 12 at max and a DPS of 48 at max placement. The poison DPS from one Rouge is 17.6, and the poison DPS from max placement is 70.4. This all adds up to a DPS of 118.4. Yes, I did choose Master Plan over Chaos Control, even though Chaos Control is the one with the higher DPS, but honestly, it's not by much. Rouge is a starter and just can't afford to take that cost hit. Her value comes from how cheap she is. Plus, this will give her a bigger splash range, overall making this trait the better choice in my opinion. Snow Border Silver. Speed of sound gives him a DPS of 80 at max and a DPS of 240 at max placement. His passive sort of negates that range debuff from Speed of Sound, and even if he didn't have that passive, his range stat is still pretty decent. He's not all that expensive though, so I definitely can see the argument for Chaos Control. That's enough of that horrible silver impression. Cream and Cheese. Sniper. This unit does not do any damage, and the only stat buff it benefits from is range. Gingerbread House. Master Plan. This unit does not benefit from any other trait at all. Chili Dog Stand. Cost efficient. It's a farm unit. The negative damage does not hurt it at all. Ruth. Speed of sound gives her a DPS of 166.6. I didn't even bother to calculate her DPS with Heavy Hitter because her cooldown is already absolutely horrible, making it a no-go. I know I kind of beat on her a little in my tier list, but with this trait, she's actually pretty good. It actually makes her a good starter. I will say her range isn't amazing though, so take that with a grain of salt. I just can't stand the price increase with how expensive she already is, so I can't justify using Chaos Control on her. Pump Man. So, I was originally going to say Chaos Control was the best for Pump Man, but I noticed that I forgot to calculate the DPS of Master Plan on Pump Man. And dear lord, I am happy I decided to go back and do that. Pump Man with Master Plan has a DPS of 26 at max and a DPS of 78 at max placements. One Pump Man has a burn DPS of 140.4 and max placement burn DPS of 421.2, bringing his total DPS to 499.2. Small reminder that Pump Man isn't that expensive and is a splash unit. Frost Queen Blaze. Chaos Control gives her a DPS of 150, as well as making her Frostbite DPS 56.2. This totals out to a DPS of 206.2. The DPS difference between Chaos Control and Speed of Sound in this unit isn't huge, but you have to remember her ability exists. The ability really only uses her damage stat and not her cooldown, just making Chaos Control the better option on her. Her ability really is amazing. Amy the Bat. While, yes, it is true she has the best DPS in the game while her ability is active, it isn't active for very long. That, and it's still nothing to write home about. Her damage over time is also capped at 50 as a max. She's really only used as a support, meaning I'd really only recommend Sniper for her. Her range isn't great anyways, so she kind of needs it. Eggman. His DPS isn't good at all. That and he's single target. The only good part about him is his summons, so I'd have to recommend Master Plan. His summon cooldown is very lengthy, so he heavily benefits from this trait. Metal Sonic. Speed of Sound gives him a DPS of 600 and a burn DPS of 24, making his total DPS 624. I can see the argument for Chaos Control, as he's more of an in-game unit anyways, so you'd be getting more than enough money to max him out, but he's already so pricey. That and his range is already pretty good, so the range hit really isn't that bad. On top of this, he's going to be getting a pretty good buff in the next update. I highly recommend storing one if you have him. Cursed Puppeteer Cream. I won't lie, she's getting nerfed this update. From what I've seen, it doesn't look terrible for her. She's still definitely going to be a meta unit at the very least. I'd recommend using either Chaos Control for more crowd control, or Speed of Sound for single target damage. Festive Lordex. Speed of Sound gives him a DPS of 150 and a burn DPS of 3.7, making his total DPS 153.7. Yes, he technically has a higher DPS with Chaos Control, but it's by very little. That and he's a starter, so taking that price increase is really not good for him. Biggie Claws. I honestly can't say one good trait for Biggie Claws. There's 3 different ways you can use them. If you're looking for money, then cost efficient is the way to go with a DPS of 75 and a froggy DPS of 127.5. If you want a damage Biggie, then you can either use Speed of Sound or Chaos Control. Speed of Sound focuses more on Biggie and his AoE attack, while Chaos Control focuses more on Froggy and his raw damage. Finally, you can use him as a support with Telekinesis, giving him a DPS of 74 and Froggy a DPS of 138.9. Though, I won't lie, I don't really see the vision too well with Telekinesis. His attack is already really slow and the knockback just isn't enough for me to really be happy with him. I recommend the first 2 more.
Hey Chris, what's on the mug?
World's greatest son.
I love hot dogs. I love hot dogs. I love hot dogs. Hot dogs. Hot dogs. I love hot dogs.